Welcome to session 10, inching close to the end of this course, Political Introduction to the Study of Political Science. Session 10 deals with political participation. Having the right culture, because we have been socialized. What are some of the things that we need to do to support the system? We need to participate. We don't have to sit on the fence. That's why I indicated that people who have the right, especially the participant political culture, invariably tend to participate in the politics of the state. So this session deals with participation. The session examines the overall pattern of citizens' involvement in politics. So in political culture, we looked at people's attitudes towards government. The session is designed to demonstrate the process of citizens' involvement in politics of the state and the extent to which this involvement enhances the development of the state. If we really thoroughly get involved, as it were, we're going to deal with a number of things: definition of political participation, criteria for effective participation, varieties of participation, why socio-economic modernization increases participation, types of participation, and then forms of participation. Quite a tall order, but I'm hoping that we'll finish in no time. The reading list is as shown on your screens. Let's look at some definitional issues. Every citizen can theoretically participate. Theoretically, every citizen can participate and perhaps influence decisions. However, in reality, there's an equal degree of participation and influence. Some participate more than others. So participation has become ingredients, very essential ingredients, and even a prerequisite for good governance. Participation is also variously defined. So let's consider a number of them. According to Hegel, political participation is activity by which individuals formally intended to influence who governs or how they do so. Weber and others define political participation as the active engagement of citizens with public institutions, an activity which falls into three well-defined modes: voting, election campaigning, and contacting or pressurizing, either individually or through group activity, including non-violent protests. So even when people go on demonstrations, especially non-violent demonstrations, is a form of participation within the state. Even though we call it anomic behavior, it's a form of participation. According to UNESCO, political participation is a collective, sustained activity for the purpose of achieving some common objectives, especially a more equitable distribution of the benefit of development. That's what UNESCO says. According to Jeff Berry, and others, political participation define it as those activities of citizens that attempt to influence the structure of government, the selection of government officials, or the policies of government. According to Huntington and others, political participation refers to the activity of private citizens designed to influence government decision-making. This definition limits attention to activity rather than attitudes and to the behavior of private citizens and so on. So you are interested in activity that tends to influence government, it influences government officials, influence government institutions, with the aim of trying to impact positively on public policies and programs. Following from these definitions, we can infer that political participation include all those activities by private citizens that seek to influence or support the government. Taking part in politics, the general level of participation in society is the extent to which people as a whole will be active, in politics. Full participation boils down to popular participation, where the largest proportion of the citizenry is invited and expected to express their wishes on issues of governance. The views of the majority should prevail on very many issues in the state. As when we try to unpack the definition, these are some of the specifics that we get. So what will be the criteria for effective participation? For participation to be effective, the following must be met. It must be voluntary. You don't have to coerce me to vote. So then it doesn't promote participation at all. So voluntary participation, the behavior of citizens must either be in support or against a regime, and it must be voluntary. There must be the intention, or what you call the intentionality of participants that these activities are political and efficacious, we need to be interested. That are they political? There must be a reasonable possibility that the participant actions, whether undertaken individually or collectively, will have the intended effect on policy. So if my participation will have no effect at all, then what is the value of that participation at all? So if I'm going to vote, and there's a tendency that my vote will not count, then it is a useless form of participation. There must be an element of conventionality or legality about it. The effort to oppose the policy of government must be a matter of right and not of a privilege. So if I decide to oppose the government, it shouldn't be as a matter of right. Right. So the argument here is that there must be some element of conventionality or legality about it. If, for instance, the right to vote is governed by law, it's not everybody who can vote. You must register to vote. You must be of a certain age and so on. So there must be some conventionality or legality about the process, really. And the effort to oppose the policy must be a matter of right and not a privilege. So if I oppose the policy of government, I should not be demonized, for instance. I should not be seen as somebody who wants to undermine the law or who wants to undermine the government. Apart from these criteria, an individual desire to participate or otherwise is affected by factors such as family background. You may come from a family background where they don't see participation as important. There may be some families who are not even interested in voting. So when you grow out of that, there's a tendency that you may also copy, especially with the socialization process. Socio-economic status. Some people want to go to a farm and go and get something. The person is so impoverished, he's not interested. Level of education. The higher the education, the possibility that a person will participate. Access to mass media. There's some people who don't even know when the voting day is and so on. Or if the people are not properly, the processes are not properly publicized for them to know. Group or organization identity. There are some church groups who don't even vote. So when you are a member of that church, certainly you will not even vote. And then political culture. There are some people who think that their vote will not even make a difference, or their participation will not make a difference at all. Especially if you have parochial political culture, it is likely to affect your level of participation within the state. Joan Nelson has identified 3 varieties of participation. What we call horizontal variety of participation involves partisan or what we call political behavior, voting, campaigning, interest groups, and so on. So that highly, highly partisan. Then we have the vertical variety. And participation includes occasions when members of the public develop particular relations with the elite or officials, relations mutually beneficial. And then we have what we call participation in the administrative process. It takes the form of intergroup activity to shape administrative decisions between a patron and client relationship. You want your DCU to do something for you. You want certain decision to be taken at that level, and so on and so forth. These are the forms or the varieties that we have. Why socio-economic modernization increased participation? The difference between traditional and modern societies concern the scope and intensity of political participation. In wealthy and more industrialized, urbanized, complex societies, more people become involved in politics in more ways than they do in less developed agricultural, rural, more primitive and social systems. The only difference here is that, if you look at Ghana, our voter turnout is very, very, very high, something that even the democratic world will envy. Maybe it's a plus for us. The more developed a nation is, the higher the level of political participation. Not just phone-ins, but writing letters, writing memos, and so on, asking questions, quality participation, not just writing, phone-in and all of that. The link between the level of economic development and political participation is also explained below. A society's level of participation tends to be vary, and it should be vary with socio-economic status. Socio-economic development also promotes political participation because it leads to a multiplication of organizations and social associations and involvement of a larger group and so on. So when you have a variety of organizations, it gives avenues, several layers for people to participate. And then economic and social modernization produces tensions and strains among social groups. New groups emerge, established groups are threatened, low status groups, and so on, seize opportunity to improve their lots among others. You have economic development in part requires a notable expansion of the functions of government. The more that governmental actions affect groups, the more those groups seek to influence governmental decision making. So if government takes a decision, it is most likely that those who are going to be affected by that decision will be tempted to influence that decision. So participation will increase. The nation state is also a vehicle of socio-economic modernization. Consequently, the relation between the individual and the nation state becomes critical for him, and his identity with the state tends to override his other loyalties. So as the state becomes more important, people tend to participate in the actions of the state. The types of participation. There are others who have actually distinguished between voluntary participation, regimented participation, and personal manipulation, or participation as personal manipulation. In most liberal democracies, the participation is voluntary. Don't forget that we indicated that for participation to be effective, it ought to be voluntary. The main exception to the voluntary participation is compulsory voting, found in few countries such as Australia, Belgium, and until 1970s in Netherlands. So until 1970, Netherlands voting was also compulsory. But Australia, Belgium, these things are compulsory. And in communist countries, we mostly have what we call regimented participation, and that was a norm. You had to participate. You openly express your support for the regime in the selection processes. The intention here was to strengthen the authority of the government. It's still a characteristic of the modern day China. Many former communists were seeking ways to move. They are seeking ways to move away from the regimented system of participation, because really it undermines democracy, and you have to take note. In the third world or the developed world, the patron-client relationship is a typical form of participation. And we need to know. Here, low-status individuals offer political support to their patrons, employees, chiefs, religious leaders, in exchange for a measure of protection, money, and so on. So these favors might be a job or a guarantee that food will be supplied, and so on. The patron-client relation is essentially a personal exchange. You understand? You vote for me, and I will get you a job with the government. That is a type of patron-client form of relationship. So the relationship is between people with vastly different resources. Hence, it is a form of participation. That is why we call it participation as a form of manipulation, as a personal manipulation. That is the nature of our politics, really. And so people are voting not because sometimes they believe in the government, they are voting because of what they hope to get. So the participation here is a form of participation which is motivated by some form of manipulation. Legal forms of participation or forms. There are legal forms. Legal participation can assume a variety of forms. It can be conventional, it can be organizational, it can be professional, it can be unconventional approaches. And we say that we explain this in turn. Let's say that conventional participation is relatively routine behavior that uses the established institutions and so on, especially campaigning of candidate, voting, and so on. Most citizens participate in politics in largely symbolic or passive way, ritualistic way. Really, what are the key intentions? They don't really know what they're talking about, but they want to participate. Voting really constitutes the most visible form of conventional participation. The effectiveness of voting as a measure of active citizens participate depend on a number of factors. The extent to which the votes are really counted fairly. So if I will go and vote and my vote will not count, then really, as I said, it undermines the whole business of participation. The size of the electorate, the larger the number of votes, the less the impact of each individual has. The availability of a meaningful choices. So it's not as if all of us queuing in an election, for instance, are voting for one person. So when we are voting, one person, one vote, plus rare choices enhances this whole business of participation. Now, let's look at what we call organizational or institutional participation, and the relatively small percentage of citizens who play an active role in organizational politics are said to engage in organizational participation. It has been established that about 30% of adult population participate actively in politics, although this figure seems high in some countries. Many political activists contribute time and money to the political party of their choice. They belong to the public. They want to belong to the public interest groups and to also volunteer to work. Another example of organizational participation is much more non-partisan, where citizens serve on governmental bodies, especially the state and local levels. Often these citizens are paid only a nominal fee or nothing at all. The form of participation can serve as a school for future political professionals. So those who serve on boards and committees and the rest, or board members and the rest, it's also a form of participation, to the state. Professional participation, and this really includes the exercise of authority through paid political positions or elective offices, party officials, lobbyists, party political appointees, presidential staffers, legislators, and so on. Not all political officials start out as professionals. One of the anomalies of political participation in democratic societies is the highest ranking officials are sometimes the least experienced. That's the danger you need to look at. Sometimes people have no qualifications, but they are ministers of state. That's what he's talking about. Those occupying the top sometimes is not by what you know, but the connection that you have within the politics of the state. So this situation will give credence to the aphorism that politics is the only profession for which no previous experience is thought to be necessary. Take note. Politics is perhaps the only profession for which no previous experience is thought to be necessary. Take note. Then we have unconventional participation. Unconventional participation is a relatively uncommon behavior that challenges or defies established institutions or the dominant culture. Unconventional participation refers to forms of political actions that are legal but nonetheless considered inappropriate by majority of citizens. It is true that acceptable behavior invariably depends on the prevailing political culture and varies widely from country to country. In Ghana, where increasingly people are putting premium on law and order, the majority traditionally disapprove of protests and demonstrations. They believe that this anomic behavior is disruptive and raises tension in society, even though demonstrations, as I indicated, is a form of participation. And the people look at it as an unconventional form of participation. There are also illegal forms of participation. Political regimes differ widely in what actions are classified as legal or illegal. So non-democratic regimes normally outlaw a great many more political activities than do democracies. Under authoritarian regimes, all parties except one are illegal. Non-democratic governments often define political crimes more broadly and punish perpetrators of such crimes more harshly than even the democratic democratic counterparts. Such illegal acts include civil disobedience, something that Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr. used extensively, and so on. So it was intended to stir a nation's conscience when he was arguing against laws he considered unjust in the U.S. system. So civil disobedience is a political act involving disobeying government or governmental authority on the grounds of moral objection. It is a law breaking that is justified by reference to higher moral, religious, or political principle. Civil disobedience is an overt and public act. It aims to break a law in order to make a point, not to get away with it though. Because when people do that, they are prepared to really accept the punishment that they have to undertake. Its moral force is based largely on the willingness to willing acceptance of the penalties that follow from law breaking. And that is why Abraham Lincoln, in the process of trying to educate his people on the use of Nonviolence Act in the 1960s in the United States of America, also told them the dangers associated with such demonstrations. He was fully conscious of the punitive measures that were going to follow subsequently. So it emphasizes both conscientious or principled nature of the act and provides evidence of the depth of feelings or commitment that lies behind it. So the term was first used by Thoreau in an essay on the duty of civil disobedience in 1849. So the moral character of civil disobedience is normally demonstrated by the strict avoidance of violence, as exemplified by Mahatma Gandhi and so on. So this approach, which was used by Gandhi in the struggle for India's independence from Britain in 1947. Martin Luther King Jr., as I indicated, also advocated this. Human rights activists, former Soviet Union, and others also engaged in civil disobedience in the 1970s. Those strict press censorship and new Stalinism repressions, among others, really disrupted their program. You also need to know that civil disobedience stresses non-violence and encourages participants to accept their punishment as legitimate. So at the other end of the spectrum, or spectrum strand, is what we call the political, terrorism. Terrorism is a broad, in a broader sense, refers to the use of terror, for further or furthering political ends. It creates an atmosphere of fear, apprehension, and uncertainty. The most common form of terrorist actions are assassinations, bombings, hostage seizures, and plane hijacks, among others, becoming very dangerous and making the world an unsafe place for you and I to live. So this term is nonetheless highly controversial. The distinction between terrorism and other forms of violence or warfare is blurred by the fact that the latter may also aim to strike fear into the wider population. As the term is highly pejorative, it tends to be used selectively. And some have argued that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. This is something that we need to know. Thirdly, it's also, some have argued that terrorism is usually conceived of as an anti-government activity or anti-government activity. Government can employ terror against their own people, for instance, as in the case of state terrorism. Terrorism is normally used to demonize or to demoralize. Sometimes it's even used to intimidate and even subjugate opponent, cow them into submission, and so on. Yeah, so concluding, what you need to know is that civil disobedience also manifests itself in subversion. Subversion is an overturning or uprooting something. In modern sense, the term is used to refer to attempt to really overthrow a government, to obstruct its authority, to undermine its existence, etc. Civil disobedience also takes the form of sedition, which involves illicit rebellion. It suggests an overt act on institution substitutiously. It establishes or it entails eliciting or inciting rebellious anti-government act. All these acts we normally refer to them as illegal forms of participation. You reckon that if indeed we want a country to develop, then we must promote the healthy forms of participation. Participations which will ensure that you and I will maintain the political system and we're able to influence public policies and programs to the extent that it impacts positively on our lives. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity.